Hello, friends. Uncle Marv here, back with another episode of the Unhealthy Podcast, the show where we talk about health in a different way. It's not just about diet and exercise and all that good stuff. We talk about a holistic approach to living healthy and being happy, looking at the entire mind, body, and spirit. And today I am back with part 2 of my conversation with Karen Covy. She is the person that went from being an attorney to a divorce coach. And we had an interesting conversation. It went a little long last time, so I asked her to come back and finish that. Karen, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I am too. Hopefully you didn't have any darts that popped up that you want to ask me or comment on.
Well, we'll see. We'll see as this goes on.
Okay. So to give a quick recap, if you're listening to this and you came here first, you should probably go back and listen to part 1 and hear how we got started. We talked about how Karen, she is an attorney, but she's a recovering attorney and is now primarily helping coach people through the divorce process. She has a heart and happiness-centered approach. And we started talking about some of the misconceptions about when people should get divorced, what's the best time, and things of that nature. So let me ask you this question to kind of get us started here, because when people hear the word divorce coach, I'll be honest, I can't think of what came to mind when I first heard that, because I'm like, how do you coach somebody through a divorce? But let me ask it in this way, because when people hear that, they probably have some sort of conception that, you know, you're going to make divorce easy. But I don't necessarily think that that's what that means, is it?
I would love it if it was, but I don't care who you are or how you do it. Getting a divorce is never easy, right? And anyone who tells you that it's going to be, you want to run from that person, because they're not being honest with you. But I can make it more manageable. I can help people do it with less conflict, with less ugliness, with less expense, with less damage to themselves and their children. Is it going to be easy? I would never say that. But is it going to be a little bit easier or better long term? Yes.
Is this considered a holistic approach to divorce?
I consider it that. I don't know how other people would think about it, but that's sort of what I think. Because here's the thing about divorce that most people don't think about, because, you know, unless you're in the business. And that is, I mean, divorce has a lot of moving parts. It affects almost every area of your life: your money, your home, your kids, your social status, sometimes your job. And it affects your identity, everything about you. And so it needs a holistic approach. And the law for most divorces is about 10%. The other 90% is all those other things. And so people, if you want to get through it better, you need more than simply an attorney, because they're going to deal with that legal part, but that's all they do. And people assume that the rest of it goes along with it, and that's not a good assumption. That's one of the misconceptions that people have about divorce.
So all of the things that we see with people going through a bad situation, most of that has nothing to do with the legal aspect, what you're saying, correct?
Correct. Now, sometimes it can't. You can turn it into, it gets played out in a courtroom. It gets played out in a legal system, but that doesn't mean that that's, number one, the best place to do it, or that the system is equipped to handle that. For example, let's say, you're fighting with, I've had people fight over the craziest stuff, right? And let's say it's, you've got kids, and I've seen people go to court to fight over who takes the child for a haircut, or this person took the child and got a haircut that the other parent doesn't like. And now they're in front of a judge arguing about the kid's haircut. What do you think is the judge's qualifications to make a decision about who should have gotten the child a haircut?
I mean, to me, that sounds like it's more a problem about who's in control or who wants leverage, which the law can't address, right?
Exactly. Here's the problem with the divorce system, in my humble opinion. And that is that you're taking a family problem, a relationship problem, and you're plunking it into a legal system that was never designed to handle it. The legal system in our country is set up to be one side versus the other side. That's how it works, right? And the idea is the two sides, fight in court and bring out evidence so that you somehow get to the truth or a decision. Usually a decision is the best you can hope for. But that's the way the legal system is. It was never designed to deal with family problems like this. So it does it badly. Now, a part of a marriage is legal because you make a legal contract. You have to get a license to get married. You get married, and the law recognizes you as a married couple, so you can file taxes together and do things together as a couple. So you need to deal with the legal part. But that's not most of it for most people. And sometimes you get the wacky stuff, and people will use legal tactics and legal maneuvers to torture each other. They do that all the time. But that doesn't mean that that's the way the system was designed to work.
So as I've kind of, I'm not going to say studied divorce, but as I kind of look at it, divorce really was meant to only deal with like the tangible stuff, the assets and stuff. And we've kind of tried to make it fit other areas. Is that fair?
Yes, exactly. I mean, the legal system isn't designed to deal with kids particularly well. It does it because it has to. Like somehow, somewhere, you've got to make these decisions about when do you see your kids and what are the rules around parenting and, who makes decisions for your kids. And all of those things need to get decided somewhere. They're part of a divorce, so it falls on the court system. But it's so much better when the parents can stay out of the court system, make those decisions as parents, and then bring to the court system their agreement, which the judge will then review, make sure is fair, and sign, and they go on their way. So the legal part is an important part, but it's better for human beings to deal with their problems outside of the court system. And I would say that applies not only in family law, but in every area of law. It costs a lot of money to go through the court system to resolve a dispute. That's the only thing the court system was designed for, how to resolve disputes between two people who can't work it out themselves. And it's going to be more expensive no matter what context you do it in. And it's also probably not going to give either side the deal that they would like, right? It's some people are there. You're going to get a little of this, but a little more of this, but a little less of that. So typically when a judge makes a decision, there's often both sides are not totally happy with it. But if you can stay outside of the court system and make your own deal, you can be more creative. You can do more things than a judge would be able to do legally. So it just is better for everyone, especially in the family context.
Yeah, that idea of compromise just doesn't seem to work out the way we think it does.
No. So. I mean, often judges will do what we call splitting the baby. So they make a decision and you've each got half of the kid. Nobody's happy with that.
Right. Interesting. So you mentioned the fact that, our system wasn't meant to deal with these types of situations. But a lot of times there seems to be like we go into it with the wrong intent in terms of divorce. And so we end up making mistakes. What are, in your mind, some of the common mistakes that people are making while going through a divorce?
Well, what you just said is going into the system and believing that you are going to get something that is air quotes, fair, or that there will be justice done. Because what you think is fair, I guarantee you, is going to be different than what your spouse thinks is fair, and different than what the lawyers think is fair, and probably different than what the judge thinks is fair. So people think they're going to go into divorce court, they're going to get a chance to tell their whole story to the judge, who will sit patiently and hear it all, and then decide that what they think is fair is really what should happen. That rarely, if ever, happens. First of all, the court is run by rules, so you don't get a chance to just sit on the witness stand and tell your story. If you want to talk about, how your spouse did this or was bad or did that, or, didn't do the dishes or left the laundry on the floor or whatever it is, like, the judge is not going to hear that. The court rules don't allow it. You have a limited time. You can only, you have to introduce evidence in certain ways. You don't ever get to tell your story. The judge doesn't care what your spouse did unless it's legally significant. And what you think is significant is very different than what the law does. So people they think they want their day in court to be vindicated, to get justice, but the system doesn't work that way. It's not like the TV trials that you see that are exciting and dramatic and what a real trial, I have to tell you, it's a lot of documents. It's a lot of financial records. It's boring most of the time. You get the 2 minutes of drama that could be big drama, but the rest of the day is kind of dull, and it doesn't happen the way it happens on TV.
So no attorney that is turning the screws because he believes that it's, he was never home, so we're going to make him pay for that.
Yeah, here's the problem. Every state in the union has no-fault divorce, which means it doesn't matter if your husband took the garbage out or your wife did the dishes. Like, none of that ever comes out. It doesn't matter what they said or how many arguments you had, or none of that matters. It's all backstory. It's the stuff that never makes it into the movie.
Interesting. All right, so you just said something. So growing up, I grew up in Florida. And we always heard about Florida being a no-fault state, and in most cases, it was used in employment situations where, or not no-fault, at will, where you work at will, your employer can fire you with or without reason, and that marriages were the no-fault where there's really. It's 50-50 pretty much is what it is. You just said every state has a no-fault rule. Is that true, right? Or is it a little nuanced there?
It's nuanced. 50-50 has nothing to do with no fault.
Okay.
50-50 is how property is divided. And there are two ways property is divided depending on what state you live in. Most of the states have what they call equitable distribution, which means it's divided fairly. Whatever that means, which means that's why people fight about it, because, what's fair. The other states, which is the minority of states, have community property, which is a straight 50-50. Community to property is divided 50-50. Of course, you can still argue about, is that community property or was that separate property? But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
Okay.
So there's always gray area. That's why lawyers make money. That's different than no-fault divorce. No-fault divorce means that it doesn't matter if you had an affair, or if you didn't come home, or if you abandoned the house, or you didn't take care of the kids, or whatever. Like, none of that matters. If you say to the court, we have irreconcilable differences, that's the ground for divorce. The other stuff doesn't affect property division.
Gotcha.
And often doesn't affect, it depends on the state, whether it affects spousal support. Because sometimes, and this just, it's like throwing salt in a wound. There are many states where your spouse could have an affair, and that's what broke up the marriage, but that spouse was the lower earning spouse, so you still have to pay support, even though you're getting a divorce that you didn't want with a person that cheated on you. That stings a lot.
It does. Ouch. Guess I'll remember that Well, divorce is not going to come up in my
Good.
family.
Good.
Oh my goodness gracious. So now let's do another pivot here, because I think that what you were starting to talk about is, in a lot of sense, divorce technically shouldn't have emotion in it when it comes to the legal side. But of course, we bring our emotion to that. I mean, how can you not? So how do you help somebody balance the emotional issues of divorce with the practical and legal parts of divorce?
You deal with your emotions first. Emotions drive divorce. So that's what makes it take longer. That's what makes it cost more. And that's what drives up the conflict. So, for example, I'll tell you a story. I had a case one time where it was contentious. The wife didn't want a divorce. The husband did. And they fought and fought and fought and fought. Ultimately, they came to a deal. All the paperwork was done. We're standing in front of the judge. Wife's lawyer. I had the husband in this case. The husband's lawyer. We're proving up the case. We're going over all the documents. And the wife says, I don't agree. And the judge looks down and says, wait, okay. You can't get to this point unless you agree. What happened? No, I changed my mind. I don't agree. What's the problem? It's the rocks. Excuse me? The landscaping rocks. What landscaping rocks? Well, he's keeping the house, and those landscaping rocks, my father paid for those landscaping rocks. He can't keep those rocks. And the judge, at this point, the judge looks down at both lawyers. Both of the lawyers are like, huh? What? Dumbfounded. And the judge is like, you go out in the hallway, you figure it out, right? So off we go with the two people. And finally, I get my client was like so angry and frustrated. He was like, you know what? I've given all I'm going to give. I'm like, what did the landscaping rocks cost? $1,000. I'm like, just give her $1,000. Do you want to be divorced or not? Right? To your point, at that point, it's a business decision, right? And he's like, fine, I'll give her $1,000. I go to the other lawyer. He'll give her $1,000. He talks to his client. No, she wants those rocks. I'm like, what? Yeah, she wants to rip those rocks out of the landscaping, and she wants those rocks. Now, mind you, she was living in an apartment. I don't know what she was going to do with the rocks. But the point is, it wasn't about the rocks. And that's what you learn, is that it was her emotions we were standing in court. This was it.
Right.
It was done. They didn't have kids. They were going to be done with each other, and she didn't want to let go. Mm. So ultimately, cooler heads prevailed, and, he gave her $1,000. He kept his rocks. That was the end of that. They got divorced. But that's what I mean when I say emotions drive divorce. It wasn't ever about the rocks. It was the only thing you could think of.
Right. All right. So you just mentioned something in that story, and don't be mad at me for picking this one thing out. You said that you were in court with them.
Yes.
So this isn't something where you just coach them and send them on their way. Do you always go to court with them?
Oh, no. This was a story from when I was actively representing him as a lawyer.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So as a coach, I have gone to court with clients, but I don't usually. It just depends on what my role is, and does my being in court serve a purpose, right? If a client needs me there for moral support and to keep, to bolster them or give them confidence or what have you, then there's a point for me being there. But most of the time, there's not.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. That's okay. It tweaked in my head. I'm like, interesting. So let's now try to get this back on track and talk more about your coaching, and let's get into some specifics. I want to ask you about something that I saw called the Divorce Roadmap 3.0.
Yes.
So I'm got to ask this. Was there a 1.0 and a 2.0?
Of course. Of course. I learned something from techies.
Okay.
You got to do it in order.
Yeah.
this is a program that started years ago in the 1.0 version, and it's an education-based program because divorce doesn't work the way you think it does, and most people don't understand how it works. And the genesis of the program, what came from my time as a lawyer, because like I said, I always believed in education. So I would sit down to the client and I would start explaining how everything worked. And after a while, it was like, wah, 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 wah. And they glazed over. And I was like, yeah, none of this is going in. And the thing about lawyers is we charge by the hour, right? So they would sit there, they would ask me questions, they would get answers. A couple days later, they would get on the phone, they would ask me the same question and get the same answer and pay for it a second time and a third time often because you can't take it all in. There's just too much. So I said to myself, what if I made videos and explained it in the videos that people had access to 24/7, 365, that they could watch over and over and over again. And so they didn't have to pay 2 and 3 times to get the same information, and they could take it in chunks when they were able to hear it and process it. So that was the genesis of the program. And it's based on the other thing I wanted to do, because if you asked most divorce professionals, how does this work and what's going to happen in what order and how do you do this? They're going to say to you, well, it depends. Depends on how you do it. It depends on, who your spouse is and what you want and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, it can't be that complicated. So I sat down and I thought about it and I created a framework. There are 10 steps that you are going to go through. I don't care who you are, where you are, or how you do this. You are either going to go through these 10 steps in pretty much this order. Some of them, the order might get flipped. Or if you don't go through it, hopefully you made a conscious decision to skip that step because you didn't want to go through it. And it's going to be in this way. So by having a framework and seeing what's down the pike, people can get prepared for it. And that way they don't make dumb decisions because they didn't know what was coming. They know what's coming. You can get prepared. You can make a plan. And that makes more sense to me anyway. It makes your experience of how you go through this a little bit less ugly and less painful. So that's why I created the program. It's been a success. Hundreds of people have gone through it at this point. And so now it's in its 3.0 version.
All right. So are there literally 10 videos or plus or minus that number?
No, there's a lot more videos than that. Because, okay, here's the deal. I don't want to scare anybody, but you don't want to sit and watch an hour of videos about divorce. Maybe you do, but if I break the videos down into chunks of maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever it is based on subject, you're going to be able to take it at your own pace and it's not so daunting, right? You don't have to say, oh, I was in the middle of this video. Was I at minute 37 or 42, right? And re-listen to stuff. So it's broken down into chunks and it's actually divided into modules. So it's organized. So here's the video set, the module on kids. Here's the one on money. Here's on how do you work with your lawyer so that you can keep your legal fees more manageable. Here's what do you need to know after your divorce so that you can really make sure that you put it behind you and create the life you want. Because the whole thing about divorce that people don't think about is you do not want your divorce, if you have to go through one, to be the defining moment of your life. That there was everything before divorce and after divorce, like Anno Domini. No, you want the divorce to be a blip in the radar screen of your life. It was ugly while you went through it, you put it behind you, and you moved on to live the life you really want, right? That's what it should be. So that's what I help people do.
All right. And I'm going to ask this because somebody out there is thinking it. Somebody doesn't watch some of the videos, comes to you, asks a question. Do you ever, reply back, did you not watch this video?
No, that would be rude. So no, I don't do that. We like the happy part, right? I want happy clients. And so it depends. I mean, you can buy the Roadmap program as a standalone on my website, or any one of my one-on-one coaching clients gets access to the whole program. So they get a kind of is included in the package. So if they have questions, of course, they can ask me anything they want. They can go through every video in the program. They can go through none of the videos in the program. If they're like, yeah, I don't want to do that. Fine. I don't care. If you just bought the program, usually if you're buying it as a standalone off the website, if somebody's going to ask me a question, yeah, and they email me, if it's a reasonable question, and it doesn't require 25 pages of email to answer, then yeah, I'll just answer it. But for the most part, if you want the one-on-one answers, you need the one-on-one coaching. It's just going to be better for you and for everybody.
All right. So having said that, so the video series, they can do as standalone or as part of the program. We mentioned last time your podcast called Off the Fence. What was the impetus for that? Because there's a part of me that thinks, well, you can just send a lot of your people to your podcast and get some of that information as well, right?
Yeah, you can. But there's no structure to it. And my podcast, I want to bring more information to people, more knowledge and I don't know everything. Like lawyers like to think we know everything, but I really don't. And so I interview smart people about all different kinds of aspects, not just of divorce, but of marriage, of relationships, of decision making. So the podcast is much broader. And you'll get a lot of information in the podcast, but it's not structured the same way that the program is very focused. You want to get from the beginning to the end in as few steps as possible and as reasonable a way as possible. So that's what the program's about.
All right. So I want to give I don't know if this is going to be a tip, a testimony or what, but going way back, episode 36, how to organize your financial life. That doesn't necessarily have to be a show about divorce. That could just be a show about getting yourself in gear financially in general.
Yes, exactly. I mean, the whole point of this was to appeal to a broad range of people. It's about life. It's about living a holistic life, being happy, being healthy, being successful. I just recorded a podcast. It hasn't dropped yet, but it's about being healthy and getting through menopause and how that affects relationships and divorce. So that's why it's decision-making, divorce, and more. It's a little bit of everything.
Wow. I'm sorry. This is way off base here, but I was at PodFest a couple of weeks ago, a conference for podcasters in Orlando, Florida. And one of the people that I was having breakfast with on Sunday, we were talking about doing some upcoming shows. And I'm not going to say her name because she'll be embarrassed. But she's like, yeah, I want to come on I want to talk about menopause on your show. Nobody ever talks about menopause. And can you believe that in the last couple of weeks, I have heard the word menopause being talked about either in a podcast or, on a podcast like almost every day since.
Maybe it's a sign.
But not me.
Okay. But here's the thing. You're a married man. You need to know about menopause because it's going to happen to your wife. And then if she's dealing with it, it's going to affect you. So knowing about this stuff isn't going to hurt you. Well,
that's what we're focusing on. I'm going to do a menopause tips for men show. How to live through menopause and perimenopause and all the pauses.
And all the pauses.
Oh, my goodness gracious. So, Karen, there was one other question I was going to ask you because there was another thing I saw that you can help people kind of tie up loose ends after a divorce.
Yes.
I'll be honest, somebody like me, thick-headed and stuff, are like, what kind of loose ends are there in a divorce?
Well, divorce documents, most people when the judge stamps their divorce judgment, they just want to be done and they don't ever want to see it again. They don't want to think about it again. Like, let's move on, right? But the problem is divorce documents are not self-executing. And here's what I mean. So the divorce says you're going to divide the checking account. Each of you gets half. And then but then what are you going to do with it? Does one of you keep the checking account? Do you close it down and you each get your own? How does that happen? The bank doesn't automatically, the judge doesn't send the paperwork to the bank. The bank goes, okay, we're closed. You get half, you get half. And no, you have to go do that. Now, most people know enough to close their bank accounts, but it's about, credit cards. Making sure if you might not think about it because maybe it was your spouse's credit card, but you're a co-signer. Well, that could still potentially in the future affect your credit score if your spouse stops making payments. So you want to make sure that all of that is separated. You want to make sure that everything that was said in the divorce paperwork actually happens. And you would be amazed at the number of times it doesn't, because people don't want to deal with it and they don't follow through. For example, let's say, a percentage of your retirement account is going to get transferred to your spouse. Again, that doesn't just happen. You got to do the paperwork and you've got to send it to the retirement plan company and you've got to make sure everything happens. And if you don't do that, I don't care what the divorce paperwork said, it doesn't, you're never going to get the money. So it's about tying up those loose ends and then thinking beyond to your life beyond. Okay, did you change the life insurance beneficiary? Because if do you really want that if you get hit by a bus, God forbid, walking out of the courthouse after your divorce, your spouse gets all of your life insurance? Did you make that change? Did you change your will? Did you think about, and for parents, this is important too, is to think, okay, if something happens to me, what happens to the kids? How are they taken care of financially? How are they taken care of physically? Who's going to be their guardian? And it might be their spouse, but who's the next person in line? So there are a lot of things to think about and a lot of loose ends to tie up that you might not think about or want to deal with, but you need to deal with them, because the longer you wait to deal with them, A, the more time you give bad things to happen, and B, it's like a monkey on your back. You got to do it. You got to do it. You don't want to do it. And, and it just becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. Just do the things, right?
Yeah, I just was thinking in my head, all those possibilities of whatever existed before the divorce. It doesn't just disappear, the debt that you talked about. And even if you take your name off the credit cards, there's still a history before the divorce that will follow you for a little bit, right? Because you just can't erase, all those previous years of credit history together.
Right. So it's just about making sure that everything that was supposed to happen, that you thought was going to happen, actually happens. And then after all those loose ends are tied up, then you can put your divorce behind you and start focusing on the next chapter, which is what do I want to create? What kind of life do I want to live? And that's a question that when you're on the front end of a divorce, you can't even think about it. Like, you're too flooded with emotion. You're too you can't get there. But if you do a divorce in a healthy way, I would argue that at some point, as you're going through the process, you're starting to deal with your emotions. They're going down. You're focusing on other things and thinking about, how do I want to live my life? What do I want to create? Will give you the best chance of ending your divorce in a place where you're ready to do that, versus leaving all of the hurt and the anger and the upset and the emotion and letting it stew in the divorce and letting the litigation and the court system, keep jacking that up. And then at the end of your divorce, you're just a total mess and you're going, okay, now what? I don't know. Now I've got to start doing the work. That if you had been doing it all along, you would have had a much easier transition.
Very interesting. Karen, you've given me a lot to think about. Probably more the fact that I don't ever want to think about divorce.
And that's a good thing. I mean, I know it sounds strange, but I am the most happily married divorce lawyer I know. I love my husband. He's amazing. I believe wholeheartedly in marriage for love, which is why I also believe in divorce when you got to do it.
Marriage for Love. Is that the title of your book?
No, the title of the book is When Happily Ever After Ends: How to Survive Your Divorce Emotionally, Financially, and Legally.
Is that really? Is that your book?
Yeah, that's my book.
Oh, why didn't I see that? Let me find that. Is it on the Amazon?
Of course.
All right. Grab that and promote that for you. What was it called again?
When Happily Ever After Ends.
Happily Ever After. Okay. People have written books. Shatters, Fails, Ends.
Right. Yeah.
All right. There it is. By Karen Covy. All right. Paperback and Kindle. Beautiful.
Yep.
So I'm going to have the link for that in the show notes, folks. You can look at that. Of course, I've got other questions flooding my mind. And do you ever have people who have you been through a divorce? And does that help you help us?
I have people ask me that. And, for a long time, that sort of got in my way. That was my own story in my head. And then I realized that if you've got cancer and you have a tumor, do you go to the doctor and say, have you ever had cancer before you operate on me? I need to know if you've been through this, right? No, you say, have you ever done this with other people before? Are you a qualified surgeon, right? It doesn't matter if they've done it before. And so I kind of bring both sides to this because I know what a good marriage looks like. The other question people do ask me is it even possible to be happily married? Is that even a thing? And I can look at them 100% sure and say, yeah, it is. I can tell you that because I've done it. And what I've never been through a divorce, but I've helped hundreds, probably at this point, thousands of people do it and do it in a better way.
All right. Is the rock story the craziest thing you've ever had to deal with?
That was pretty crazy, but yeah, there's a lot of crazy stories.
Oh.
Divorce lawyers have really good stories, I got to tell you.
I'm sure. Okay. Have I asked you good questions?
You have asked me amazing questions. Thank you.
Thank you for answering. All right. Anything you want to ask me?
You going to go home and kiss your wife and tell her how happy you are to be married to her now?
That's part of our agreement.
It's like my husband always says to me, he is so happy that I do what I do because he looks so good at the end of the day.
Oh, my.
So yeah, it's appreciate what you got.
Absolutely.
If you've got something good, appreciate it and make sure your spouse knows. Like, don't take it for granted.
Yeah. Well, she does need to hear that a lot because I work a lot and she doesn't. So I have to remind her, yeah, I'm still here. You're still important.
And that's important. And I hope you never, ever, ever need me.
I may need you for another show, but I will never need you for this.
We can work on that.
All right. So KarenCovy.com, and Covey is spelled without the E, so Covy. On that site, you can find all of her information as well as the podcast that we mentioned, Off the Fence with Karen Covy. And now I've got to make sure I get a link to the book, When Happily Ever After Ends, How to Survive Your Divorce Emotionally, Financially, and Legally. Wow, it's a mouthful. Clicking on your site, it's like, don't want to make mistakes in your divorce? You need the dream team. So, all right. Well, Karen, thank you very much for doing this. And thank you again for agreeing to come back and do a part 2. And
Thank you so much for having me, back for part 2.
Well, I just did not want to leave out any of the information, and the stories are great, and I tried my best not to ask you about them, but I appreciate it. And that's going to do it, folks. So if you're even thinking about it, or you know somebody going through it and they need a little help just to get started, send them to KarenCovy.com, and she can help them navigate the road of divorce in a much healthier, hopefully less financial manner. So that'll be great. Karen, we'll see you soon.
I look forward to it.
And to everybody out there listening, thank you for downloading and subscribing to the show. Check us out over at unhealthypodcast.com, and follow the advice that we gave on this show and every show, and try to live your life in a more healthy and happier way. We'll see you soon. Holla.